Hey, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Thank you for joining me in another painting demo. Today I'm going to share the process of this aerial scenery painting. So I was out on a bike ride the past weekend before it was raining, and I saw some blue sky and some beautiful clouds, so I decided to go out for a bike ride and take some photo references and just enjoy the scenery. It's turning fall, so the trees are having these beautiful colors, and because it started to rain a little bit more often in the Seattle area, so I start to see some beautiful cloudscape. So I rode around the neighborhood and I went up to the top of a parking structure and I took this shot. I actually haven't painted aerial perspective scenery like this one because I feel when you are taking a photo from very high up, everything looks very small. And I usually feel like when the scale of a scenery is this big, it's a little bit less relatable. But during that day, I really feel nice when I was looking at this scenery, so I decided to paint it anyways. So after a simple drawing, I pretty much pre-wet the whole paper and I start to paint the sky. Now I do want that nice fluffy white cloud in the sky, so a good way to do that is to pre-wet the whole sky portion and then go back and paint the blue sky. That way you have some nice soft edges. So while it is still wet, I also painted the dark side of the cloud so that it creates some volumes. I try to avoid hard edges, but if the paper is starting to dry, I also use a little bit of the texture of the paper to have some fuzzy edges around the cloud. And it depends on how fast your paper is drying. In my case, my paper will be dry within about 10 minutes or so, so I need to finish that first wash, that sky, within that 10 minutes. I can spray a little bit of water, but this time I pretty much just power through it. So as the paper is starting to dry, I need to increase the pigment on my brush. I need to make my paint a little bit more intense. Otherwise, when it turns from moist to damp, it's going to create cauliflower edges if your brush is too watery. So increase the amount of paint you use as the paper is starting to dry. Now you can start to see a little bit of hard edges because the paper is starting to dry, but I don't really mind that. There can be a little bit of hard edges here and there, just so we can have better definition of the cloud. But I do use a damp brush to soften some of the edges that I paint so that the sky remains pretty nice and clean. The bottom is not completely dry yet, so I go back in a little bit more wet onto wet, adding a little bit flatter, smaller clouds in the distance. Even though cloud is this abstract shape, it does still have the sense of perspective that you need to convey. The clouds that are further away, they are flatter, they are smaller. So when it approaches the horizon, you want smaller clouds, you want flatter clouds that will give you some sense of depth when it comes to the sky. Now I'm starting to paint the trees. The paper is pretty much dry, still a little bit dampness, but I use just a little bit more paint to avoid cauliflower edges while still have a little bit of softness, which is nice. This one I didn't do a value study because I was actually pretty tired, but I still try to keep value grouping in mind. And right now I'm trying to connect as much shape as possible. So right now I'm trying to connect all of the tree, the foliages together, giving just a little bit more detail in the silhouette of the tree. Other than that, all the trees can be connected into one single shape. Can do a little bit of wet onto wet, have some color variation and so on, but keep that into a single shape. You can separate them and you can give them a little bit more detail later when you're adding some more darks. Give it some attention to details when it comes to the top. Have some branches and leaves. And just that little bit of detail is enough to convey that this is a group of trees. So the value I'm painting right now is actually the middle value. And when you are looking at the photo and if you squint your eyes, the trees compared to the sky, except for the very, very light part of the leaves, they are mostly darker than the sky. So this is important that you understand that value relationship. Again, just because something is lit by the sun doesn't make it a light value. So I'm painting the freeway, and it is middle value as well. And I'm leaving out some highlight for the car. And I also try to change the color a little bit as I go. The overpass is a little bit warmer, so I try to add some warm tone to it, but try to keep the shape simple, connect all the shape together. Now the tree is slightly darker than the freeway, so there is slightly value changes, but keep the freeway still relatively darker than the sky and definitely the cloud. Now, while it is still a little bit damp, I go in and start to paint some darker values on the tree. This will start to establish some volumes, some structures. And as soon as I starting to do that, the sense of lighting start to come out. Once again, give some more attention to detail when it comes to the edges of those trees. On the top, there's a lot of pine trees poking up, so give a little bit of that detail, but also don't give that pointy detail all over the place. Use those details sparingly. If you have detail everywhere, it's just gonna turn into noise, and when you have detail all over the place, you lose detail. And by now you can start to see the contrast between the sky and the trees and the ground. I actually like to keep my sky a little bit lighter than the photo suggested. Even though the dark side of the cloud is a little bit darker, I want to push them out a little bit more. If you have a lot of dark details on the cloud, your eyes is going to bounce back and forth between the sky and the ground. That will create a little bit sense of unstableness for me. So I usually prefer to keep my sky a little bit more simple, a little bit lighter, and keep them fresh. And now the wash is starting to dry up, I can start to paint some harder edges. So I'm painting the cast shadows, the tree casting some shadows on the freeway, so I want to paint those in. Here I got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm already starting to paint the dark. But later on I realized that it gets a little bit too dark, so I starting to paint the middle value again because I realized that the freeway is a little bit lighter. So I want to paint the middle value on that first before I start to do the dark value. So it's very natural that when you're painting, sometimes you need to course correct yourself. And especially in watercolor, if you realize that you're painting something too dark, you're painting something you're not supposed to yet, grab a paper towel and press it while it is still wet. Then you can get rid of that, or at least make it very, very light, and then you can paint over that. So always try to pay attention to what you're painting. So I'm going back to the trees on the right, creating some volumes and structures. This painting feels special to me because when I'm painting it, I feel like something new is coming out from me. It's kind of hard to explain, but as you know, I've been learning from different teachers. Joseph Bookvich is my first teacher, and then I also fall in love with Andy Evenson's painting, and I start to learn from him as well. And I mentioned earlier, I actually felt quite tired when I was painting this painting, so I was painting with a lot of instinct. So combining what I learned from both masters and my experience, I felt like something new came out from this painting. Now it's a little bit hard to explain, but I feel that more when I'm doing the painting, when I was enjoying the process. We can definitely talk a little bit more about personal style in the future, but I believe that personal style is something that come out naturally as you paint, as you learn from other masters that you like. It's better to learn from multiple teachers and you combine what you like about each of them, and then with your experience, it kind of evolve into something new. And you found your own voice, your own way of interpret what you see. And that's not to say that my painting is completely original, free from any influence from anybody. That's impossible. You can still see there's quite a bit of influence from Andy and some influence from Joseph as well. But I believe that as I paint more and as I try to paint from my own heart, from my own reference and experience, I can start to find my own voice better and better. So now I do the final layer, which is the dark. I started to fill in some shadows, some details, give those cars some dark underneath contact shadow and the cast shadow on the right. And it's funny, as soon as I put that little shadow right next to the car, they start to feel like three-dimensional things. And again, that's the power of visual language. It can be simple, but very, very effective. So adding some more dark to the tree on the right, and I add a little bit more transition values as well. Some more cast shadow on the left. And I want to define the overpass a little bit more. So I'm looking at the reference, trying to study the structure, and I try not to overpaint that. A few simple shape, light and dark contrasts create that structure. Now I'm painting some street light with gouache. And now I think back, I could have used some masking fluid pen that will make it a lot cleaner, but I didn't thought of that when I was doing the painting. Again, I felt a little bit tired, so I didn't really think everything through. But still, if you use enough white gouache, it can still look nice. Painting the other tree in the foreground, that really pushes the depths and give that sense of parallax of your painting. And here is the finished painting. I enjoyed this painting a lot and I really like how it turns out. I hope you like it too. And as you might know, I launched my art community on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, definitely go check that out. For those of you who already joined my art community, thank you so much for your support. And I am so excited to start the community with you guys. I am Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Hope you have a wonderful weekend wherever you are. I will see you next time.